listening to this for the first time, happy Wednesday, everyone. Hope everyone's doing fine. This episode here is taken from our free show, as we call it. It's the Saturday show. We're probably going to have like a more... It's always going to be the Saturday crew, right? But we're going to... The Saturday show for us is a show where we don't cut off after an hour and go straight to the patron bonus half. We want to give people kind of a good example of the content that you get from this channel. And we just go. Sometimes the episodes are 3.5 hours long, like our Norm Finkelstein episode. More often than not, we go about 2 hours. Easy. Because sometimes there's up to like 6 hosts. And Saturdays are days where we can have multiple guests too. Saturday's also been the day for us to get our overseas shows in, people that live in the UK and in different parts of the world. So this show was a good show that's been in the works for a while. This is another friend of Pascal's, Dhoruba Bin Wahad. And in the video that you're going to hear for this, we always play the intro video. We actually ended with the intro video because we wanted to get right into the show. But as you hear the intro video on the end of this, I started it with a clip of Malcolm X. Because I think when we think the black nationalist mindset, I think a lot of it starts with Malcolm X. And it was a kind of an infuriating clip. You know, sometimes watching these clips makes you really angry when you're editing all this stuff out. It's this clip that goes on for far too long where this old, shitty white guy is basically trying to make Malcolm X say his name, his original name, if you will. And then we go on to the description of the show, and then I end it with an Eldridge Cleaver interview from 1997 on 60 Minutes, where it's a very different Eldridge Cleaver from the one I had been watching on all these clips as I'm putting the video together, where he's more reserved. He's actually coming off of a bad drug addiction, and he's a Republican. So Pascal, kind of more so than me, is very animated about the limits of the Black Power framework. That being said, he's definitely not opposed to all aspects of certain parts of that framework. Neither one of us. I don't want to put this all on him. So it was a very good show. It was an informative show, and I think we pushed certain issues that we wanted to push back on. But it was I think it's going to be better for you guys to hear because Brother Bin Wahab is in Africa. So the connection would go in and out visually, but audio-wise, it was actually pretty good. And there was some funny parts in there where the lights, they wouldn't turn the lights on for him. So towards the end of it, it's kind of funny. So it was a very fun, it was an informative talk. It was a very hype chat. If you want to be a part of these hype chats, it's one way. It's easy. It doesn't cost you a dime. All you have to do is simply subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/This is Revolution Podcast. If you have the means and you feel so inclined and you would like to help the show grow, well, become a patron. You get all the bonus patron content. You get the bonus patron shows, and we're adding some more. patreon.com/Bitterlake Presents. Wherever you are listening to this podcast, there are links in the description that link you to all the social media where you can find the live streams that happen every Tuesday and Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific time and Saturday 9 a.m. Pacific time. If you're a patron, then you get the show a day early, and you also, or the audio podcast a day early. And then, of course, you also get all the access to the Discord server and the bonus shows. We've been doing some great bonus shows with people like Matthew Film Guy, my good friend and podcast host, great musician Conan Neutron, of course, Jean Bajlan. Pascal has the Ask Pascal show, or I think we're changing the name. It's not Ask Pascal, it's the Mau Mau Hour. The Mau Mau Hour with the Pascal Robert. I love that name. It's hilarious. And it's in all honesty, it's very accurate. If you're new to this show from Pascal Robert's Majority Report performance, I shouldn't say performance. He wasn't performing. That's literally how he is. As I'm talking to you right now, I just got off the phone with him. And from the phone conversations to the shows, that is my brother. So thank you guys for listening. Please hit subscribe, give this a like, share this with your people. This show, I really enjoyed this show. The Saturday crew, myself, Pascal Robert, Marcus of the Left Flank Vets, and longtime activist, 19-year political prisoner, Dhoruba Bin Wahad. Thank you guys, and I am out. Good morning, good afternoon. Happy Saturday, everyone. We should have a doozy of a show for you. And thank you for everyone that tuned in yesterday for the special live stream we had talking about Haiti. Let me just hurry up and get right down to it. Let me bring in my homie, my dog, Mr. Pascal Robert.
Peace and greetings to the chat. Peace and greetings to the audience. Peace and greetings, Jason Miles.
And coming all the way live from the great state of Maine, you may know him as Marcus from the Left Flank Vets, or you may know him as that black guy in Maine. He is Marcus from the Left Flank Vets.
Yo. It's Blacchiavelli pushed out to the outskirts of the region.
Damn near Canada.
Damn near Canada.
Pascal.
Yes, sir.
Are we just going to bring in our guests and not play the video?
I think that we should give a brief introduction to a brother who deserves no introduction because he is in the whirlwind, as his Muslim name suggests. A brother who dedicated his life to revolutionary Black politics and liberation, former member of the Black Panther Party, or one of the, I believe, original members of the Black Liberation Army, former Black political prisoner, close comrade of Assata Shakur, a brother who is known by those who believe in freedom if you're willing to fight for it. Dhoruba Bin Wahad.
Welcome.
Greetings, brothers. Greetings, brothers, and everybody. Thank you for having me on the podcast.
Brother Dhoruba, as someone who has had long, prolonged conversations with you, as someone who's had the benefit of being a mentee and a student of Bruce Dixon, one of your comrades from the Black Panther Party, and someone who writes and still writes for a revolutionary journal like Black Agenda Report, and as one who had the benefit of being under the tutelage of people who came out of that revolutionary part of the movement, I'm glad that we have you here, and we have elders like you who are still around to bring your position to the table. Now, today's show is about a serious topic, and I know you have serious thoughts because you are a revolutionary. You spent your life trying to fight the system of capitalism, imperialism, and exploitation. And the topic of today's conversation is, what is the revolutionary capacity of Black America in 2021? I want to ask you that question in the crux of a theme that we have on this show. The theme that we have on the show is called the 50-year counter-revolution. The premise of that theme is that starting basically the year of my birth, 1968 up until today, all of American and global politics that have come about in that 50 years has been a counter-revolution against what has happened in the 50s and 60s, particularly the revolutionary nationalist period. Between 1967 and 1971, we saw 300 urban rebellions put this country to rubble. We had the Kerner Commission report, we had COINTELPRO. We had all of these things trying to shut down the revolutionary phase of the Black freedom movement, as some would call it. You were around to see the birth of the Black political class. You saw the betrayal at Gary, Indiana. I want to ask you, you've seen, I know you've been a student of the contemporary political developments, the rise of Obama, the neoliberal Black political class. As a Black revolutionary, I'd like you to answer the question for us. In the context of the 50-year counter-revolution, where are we now, and what is the revolutionary capacity of Black America?
Well, that's well, I appreciate the question, and I really I'm humbled by being asked this question, which is a very in-depth topic. But I know we have limited time, so let me just jump on into it. I think the 50-year period that you're talking about, roughly from a beginning in 1967, when the one second, please. When the when the national security state really began to become more of the garrison state, began to develop the more militarized policing and approach to urban what I would call urban domestic colonies. I would say that our rebound from that, our ability right now to combat the and effectively deal with what was put in place, I think it's very it's not looking good for the home team. I don't think that we're prepared for anything close to a revolutionary mass movement. First of all, we don't have a political a socio entity that represents the masses of black working people and unemployed and black youth. I think that we have been befuddled by technology. Now today, perception is reality, and so therefore it's quite difficult to organize people around any type of sophisticated or existential reality that they could comprehend and get behind and understand. I mean, something as simple as power to the people. If you ask this generation of young activists what it does actually mean, your mouth will drop open when you hear the long rambling explanations just based on intersectional experiences and subjective analysis and just plain, reactionary class views. You feel that you have a generation today that's about to reinvent failure. I mean, if we look at everything from voting rights to policing, we're fighting struggles that we already won. I mean, this generation has no connection to the radical history and the radical traditions, and even the revolutionary positions of certain segments of our movement. They have no real understanding or connection to them, so they can't really put them in the perspective that empowers them, that informs them, that helps them organize. The mass media, the global village. It permits mobilization. It permits a lot of people to move around an issue at one time, but it almost defies organization because hashtag movements are not revolutionary movements as such because there's no face-to-face relationship between the movements as activists and the actual people that's being mobilized, and there's no strategic vision and tactical game plan that a movement and its allies are implementing. And so it's very interesting that Pascal, you noted that the period of 50-year counter-revolution, I think we're being very liberal. I think we're being very conservative in saying 50 years. I mean, if we look at the institutions today that are habitated by black faces in high places, we see that that many of these individuals in these institutions came out of the so-called civil rights era and post-black nationalist of militant upsurge in the late 60s. I mean, everything from the Congressional Black Caucus to some of the committees that exist today to oversee law enforcement on the state and local levels all came out of rebellions and protests and mass organization beginning in the early 60s, 1961. 62 at the Vietnam War, when the United States was boldly financing and backing its allies who had came to victory in World War II, backing their reacclimation of their colonies, their reappropriation of resources in Africa and Asia. And so we have to really understand the context of that which was happening at home. I left office in 57 or something like that. Was it 57? Maybe 59. But when he left office, he warned about the military-industrial complex. And he was a general. He was the commander-in-chief of the expeditionary forces in Europe. He was the one that led the West in the military campaign against Nazi Germany and its allies. And when the smoke cleared, the last two standing was the so-called Soviet Union and the United States. The whole of Europe was devastated. Britain was bankrupt. France was bankrupt. Italy was bankrupt. All of the today NATO allies, who by the way are occupying the Sahel, fighting against so-called Islamic militants. All of these countries were basket cases, and the United States created many of the institutions that we're dealing with today, internationally and nationally. It created first the Brentwood Agreement, making the dollar the universal currency, good in all markets and all around the world. It launched this Marshall Plan in 45, 46 that rehabilitated and resuscitated the European economies. The U.S. armed them. The military and the corporations built the war machines for the West, and launched into this what I call fake war, this fake proxy war of they call the Cold War. And we all know what happened with that in terms of African liberation movements at that time. They were trapped between the East and the West in terms of this Cold War, in terms of the ideological underpinnings of this war between capitalism and then what we know now was basically state-run socialism or state-run capitalism, and so we in the U.S. this was corresponding to, the upsurge against the white supremacist construct of Southern segregation and Northern de jure segregation and urban concentration of Black working people, and so all of these events had propelled us into a revolutionary potential. It created in us a revolutionary potential. Even during the suppression in the late 1960s and early 70s of the movement, which by 1969 had been, COINTELPRO had basically been a successful operation. It promoted a whole class of opportunists that we know today as Negro leaders. It launched a whole bunch of organizations and programs that misdirected the energies of urban populations for housing, for better public safety, for control of law enforcement. All of the ills that we're talking about today that's supposed to be in the George Floyd bill and in the other bill that's named after this bald head clown. What was his name? The one that kicked the bucket a while back. They have another one.
John Lewis.
John
Yeah,
Lewis.
the John Lewis
Voting rights.
bill. Yeah, so you got to ask yourself, how many times have African people in the diaspora in the U.S. revisited the right to vote? I mean, how many times do we have to go back to the same issue that we already won? And so I'm gonna cut it short. I didn't want to ramble, but I just wanted to say, I said all of that to say that the potential for international solidarity and effective action, geopolitical action against the U.S. empire and its allies is very much on the table. But as far as our ability to resist what has become the white supremacist garrison state of America, I think that we are not nowhere near any type of revolutionary organization or consciousness or mass mobilization that could indicate that we could make even elemental changes. We don't even have a functional abolitionist movement. We have more people advocating reform and integration and stuff than we do actively organizing in our community in ways that abolish the white supremacist and racist controls and power that they have over our communities. So no, I think that we don't have much of a chance right now to bring about even a potent abolitionist movement. We don't have a third political party. We don't have a mass political party that deals with the reality of surplus workers that were scooped up in the creation of the prison industrial complex in the wake of the civil rights movement, the successes of the civil rights movements, voting rights, integration, led to a pushback by the right, by the states in North and South, and that pushback was mass incarceration and the rise of the militarized police state. So no, I don't think that we have much of a revolutionary chance.
We had this conversation before, and as many of our conversations end up, it was a long one. I'm going to be somewhat how should I say? It's going to be a sharp question, and we might have disagreements. Is it possible that what you have laid out as the lack of revolutionary capacity for Black America, and that's how the question was framed, demonstrates the limitations of Blackness as a long-term political project, because the internal class contradictions of that identity has rendered revolutionary politics in the name of Blackness futile by its comprador class. And what needs to be the focus now is a working class politics. And that Blackness has only obscured that politics.
I could say that in part, that's correct. Basing, let me phrase it this way. I think that part of what you're saying is correct. In responding to the white supremacist construct of America over the decades and over the centuries, identifying as Black was a necessary step in the development of mass consciousness, because we're not just working class people in the United States. Our history doesn't say we are. We know that at every turn, at every revolution, at every turn that the so-called revolutionary industrial class was supposed to rise up and unite with all the workers against the owners of the means of production, Black people were always abandoned in the last minute. Black people were always used to forward the agenda of working class people, but never benefited from that agenda, whether it was inclusion in the unions, whether it was hiring practices, whether it was ownership of small businesses, et cetera, et cetera. So having said that, we could say yes. If we were dealing with just the working class movement in the United States, where the industrial the relationship between the industrial owners of the means of production and the working class was homogeneous, applied equally to all people, all working class people, regardless of weight or race or background, but was definitely class oriented, yes, I could say that Black would be insufficient. However, we are not that people. And I think if we read George Jackson very carefully, we see that George was implying, and he said almost overtly, that the Black working class in America has a different historical mission than the white working class in the West, because of our origins as property, because of our origins as property that had become independence. There's no occasion in history where property had been, that human property, chattel slaves, became independent, no longer owned by someone, but independent. And that independence was propositioned in part in order to do exactly what you said, Pascal, make being Black insufficient in terms of relationship to the industrial ownership class. But what it really did was bifurcate our ability and our capacity for sovereign thinking, to actually act and perform and organize as a people and qualify as a people, in which case then the argument for domestic colonization would have been a primary argument, not the argument of integration, not the argument of Black faces in high places, not the argument, but the argument of organizing an independent political entity that represented self-determination for Black people. And of course, the Rainbow Coalition of the Black Panther Party in the mid 60s was precisely pointed in that direction. And also the the call for a united front against fascism was also pointed at the direction of understanding that the national security state was in a phase of consolidation during and after the Vietnam War, and that consolidation was basically finished when by 1971, 72, as the U.S. Military took its war from the shores of Southeast Asia to Watts and to our communities. And so I would say yes, Black is insufficient if we were to think of ourselves as only workers. Black, of course, would be essential if we thought of ourselves as a sovereign people and therefore had the right to self-determination. That would imply then that we could build a national movement and the idea and the struggle for reparation can then become a reality rather than a reformist method of diluting and expanding the capacity of a white supremacist construct to include people of color. We have to really understand that capitalism has produced in the post-industrial age a system and a socio-cultural norm that could almost absorb anything, any type of people, descent, or anything. It could absorb it, it could co-opt it, and it could employ it and actually institutionalize it. This is why we have something like the George Floyd bill or the Voting Rights Act, or we have all of these bills and nothing is fundamentally changed between the relationship of people of color, Black people in the United States, between their communities and the government and the powerful and the powerful elite. So we have not we have not acquired power. We have not developed any power paradigms in our communities because we allowed all of our politics, all of our local politics, to be co-opted, to be turned into reforms rather than abolitions. I mean, in New York State, New York City, for instance, we could have a decentralized police force. We could have a police force where the police union doesn't have more political clout than all of the Black people in the city of New York. That the mayor doesn't appoint the police chief. We have a public safety board. But all of those moves that were made in the late 70s to bring about those types of institutional fractures and changes that we could build on were co-opted, were encapsulated, were misdirected in that counter-revolutionary process that Pascal laid out. And so I would agree with the proposition that Black is insufficient, especially now, given the role of technology and instant communications and the creation of algorithms and weaponization of data that could literally skewer us to believe something that exists that doesn't exist, to have us fighting against a ghost, fighting for concrete power. And this is what we have today. We have movements that are led by victims. No revolutionary movement is led by victims. Once an oppressed people step forward to claim their liberation, to claim their freedom, they're no longer victims.
But brother, say it again for the people in the back. Say it again for the people in the back. Say it again.
We have today, we have hashtag movements that have developed in movements with leadership by victimhood. The victims are the ones that are trotted out and put into position of moral and ethical and even political authority. I mean, we have the victims, apolitical people. And don't get me wrong, I sympathize 150% with the families of Black and Latinos and poor people who have had their children and their loved ones slaughtered by law enforcement. But that's not my point. My point is that should serve to motivate us to acquire power, not to seek reforms as victims. And so leadership by victimhood is what brings out the Sharptons, is what brings out the Crumbs and all of these Negroes, and they're sitting up. Yeah, them fat pork chop preachers and all of them. And and I don't mean that to discourage everyone that takes a position of direct action, nonviolence direct action, because everyone is not necessarily in that category of opportunists and pimping victims of misery and pain. But however, that's what happens. That's why we have a George Floyd bill, and we have his daughter saying, small girl, saying that her daddy changed the world. I mean, how? He was murdered. He was murdered on live television. He was murdered on camera. He was murdered where everybody could see, calling for his mother, calling for this man to get his foot off his neck. He wasn't a revolutionary activist, wasn't struggling in no movement. He didn't have any ideology for which he was pursued and murdered by law enforcement. He was just an ordinary black man who was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and people called 911 on him, and the rest is history. He was a victim. And so to name a law enforcement bill after the victim rather than after the movement, or rather after the people who have empowered that movement, is to tell you how easily it is to co-opt our issues, our pain, and our powerlessness. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry.
I mean, I know Pascal knows that, I believe that only with a democratic distribution of the pain will we have any type of democratic reconciliation in a white supremacist state. And we're the only ones that's suffering. We are the only ones that's enduring this pain. And without a democratic distribution of the pain, white supremacy is not going to up and die. The white supremacist construct that is capitalist America is not going to fade away and become more benevolent and paternal and more forgiving. In fact, even talking about reparations in that context is a misnomer, because reparations cannot be given by a government to its own citizens unless they're sovereign. Only sovereign people and only people who claim people who have received reparations legally have had a valid claim to reparations. But African people are divided in the diaspora. Some of us believe we are citizens. Some believe that we have a birthright in America, and while others of us believe that we're a democrat, that we're a domestic colony, that we're an oppressed, and that we've been kidnapped, and we have our own historical, I guess would say, a destiny, and we have to fulfill that destiny, and that destiny is power based on our homogeneity as a people, on our interests as a people, not just as a class. I think if we read Amilcar Cabral, when he talks about national liberation and national struggles, he always talks about how the colonial classes have to be brought over to the side of the revolutionary liberation movement. And yeah, absolutely. I mean,
class
Jackson
suicide.
Class suicide. But I've always kind of like quibbled with that, Pascal, because I feel that if we go back to E. Franklin Fraser's Black Bourgeoisie, and we look at the development of that class amongst us, and how that class, being the most literate in many senses, being the most ambitious in many senses, in many respects, have become more or less the political and religious leadership in our communities. Okay, and that has been a problem.
Well, I'm going to push.
I wanted to add this, and before you cut me off again, Pascal, for the 5th time, I'm keeping a record now. Shots fired. The people that wrote the George Floyd bill, if I'm not mistaken, are all the black people in Congress. And what does that say about the power of the nonprofit movement when we talk about these hashtag activists, right? Like, these are all black people as well, but they definitely come from the bourgeoisie.
This is what, that's like, I mean, like the nonprofit industrial class is what is probably who wrote that bill, right? And there's just the black political class who put their name on it.
Yeah, because I think that
And
that
agree with
addresses
what
what
you're saying.
Pascal was talking about. What
I
Pascal
agree with
was,
what you're
and
saying.
what I,
Sorry. I'm sorry.
I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead, Dhoruba.
Uh, I'm sorry. You could go. I'll come.
No,
You
no.
can
I
go,
was
Jason.
just
You
saying.
were saying something.
I agree with what you're saying about, victims don't make a movement, and that was actually a really strong statement to bring that up about naming the bill the George Floyd bill, which was a very toothless police reform bill that actually had, I believe, more spending in it. I live here in Oakland, California, where they had said they were going to quote unquote defund the police. They haven't. Our crime rates are up almost more than double than where we were pre-pandemic levels.
This is nationally,
I'm talking
and
just
if we
for
look at,
Oakland. I know nationally it's up, but just
and
for
yeah,
Oakland.
I know, but Oakland is reflected nationally, and I know they got particular. Chicago's the same way. The violent crime rate is up, gun violence is up, and there's no corresponding arrests. If you notice, no, in all of these cities now, the call is for safe cities. That's like a counter call to demilitarization of the police. Defund the police was always a limited, if not reactionary, war cry, like hands up, don't shoot. I mean, how reactionary can you get, protesting police killing people with their hands up by exhibiting the universal sign of protest and saying that how you protesting and you surrendering at the same time? So I mean, young people are really confused, and they don't have a continuity and an understanding of how we developed over the last, say, 75 years politically in terms of mass organizations. So they don't see our failures. They don't see the successes that we've already had. They're all on their own existential, how they grew up and what they knew. And of course, that could be manipulated. So I think that when we look at the George Floyd bill, one of the things that we see there, the major opposition from the right and from the so-called Republicans and the right is the qualified immunity clause in that bill, the qualified immunity for law enforcement. And of course, every right-wing Republican, everybody that's trying to get into office is talking about qualified immunity should be stricken from the bill. But we have to understand that qualified immunity was created by non-elected officials, judges. There's no such thing as qualified immunity in the Constitution of the U.S. or in any other state document. Qualified immunity is simply the court's reaction during the counterintelligence phase when the police were definitely being exposed as repressive, as murderers, as racists, to protect them from from civil suits, to protect them from being held accountable. And that's what qualified immunity is. That's all it is. It's not written into stone anywhere. But however, the right is organizing against it, saying that it exposes law enforcement to dangers and all of this stuff. But it's not the qualified immunity. It's that the police in a white supremacist garrison state are treated as workers, and therefore they have a union. And the police are not workers, armed agents of the state. And as armed agents of the state, they should not have a working class union guidelines that they could exploit, that they could expand because of this special relationship to the state, which is that they have the power of life and death in their hands. They could kill, and they could exercise that power in the name of the state, in the name of the government. So they are not workers. And when we realize that, we realize the greatest vulnerability of this neo-fascist period right now, its greatest vulnerability is it doesn't have a national police force. And because it doesn't have a national police force, it has to put into effect all of these different mechanisms of military good hardware going here and training here and all of these devices and federal task force in order to have a qualified law enforcement agency that fits the profile of historical or traditional fascism. So without this police force, then all politics becomes local. All politics become the communal people, the local working class, local state people are empowered then to control law enforcement, at least on the local level, at least on the county level. We could determine public safety. We should be able to do that by referendum. We should be able to do that at the ballot box. We should be able to remove the power of the mayor of a city to appoint a police chief. We should be able to create public safety mechanisms that not only include law enforcement, but includes physical health and emergencies, emergency responses, EMS, all of this stuff. We should have public safety boards and our own public safety commissions that determine how policing in each community is administered. And therefore, we could talk about residency for law enforcement personnel in the communities they police, at least for their probationary period of perhaps 2 or 3 years. And that means that the city would have to have comparable housing for police forces, for our local law enforcement. We could change the whole paradigm. But if we're looking at reform of police, we come up with dumb shit like defund the police. You can't defund the police in a garrison state. The national security state is not going to take the financial purse strings of its police or its military away from themselves. It's because they are the guardians of property and power and privilege, and that's who they are. And so if we really had a movement, if we really had a movement that wasn't led by victims, we would have initiated by now a national class action against 5 of the police unions for decertification, and we would deal with them as such. They are not workers, and therefore they do not have working class rights. The only rights they have are the same rights that a soldier or government official would have. No more, no less. And if they need to unionize, their unions cannot be involved in policing policies that affect communities in which they are not residents, in which they are not assigned. So therefore, the police union has to be depoliticized. If we accomplish just that, we change the whole relationship between public safety and colonized and the domestic colony in America. We change the whole relationship between the working class and the state on a certain fundamental level, and that's the level to impose legal violence on working people when they protest, when they demand their rights. It is the police that break up demonstrations. It is the police that beat up workers. It is the police that break picket lines. It is the police that open the roads for scabs. It's the police. And so they're not workers. And I think that if we are true revolutionaries, we should heed what Pascal was saying, the limitations of that being black is not sufficient, because we're living in a capitalist society in which caste and class are symbiotic and have a particular impact depending on what side of the barricades you're on. And on the other hand, we have to see that we're not ordinary workers, that we are not about just working class reforms, that we are people who have been colonized, who have a different historical mission, a different historical destiny, and that is to create black power in the United States. And that black power is not exclusive of class, but it's inclusive of all people who are oppressed or in similar condition, both here in the United States. So that means we would have to have people of color, we would have to have Latinos, we would have to have Asians, everyone that is locked out of the power paradigm of this post-industrial age should be part of this political party, of this third political party. And of course, this was hijacked by Jesse Jackson. And when he hijacked the idea and the concept of the Rainbow Coalition and used it just to put black faces in corporate places and get paid with the dividends. And so, I mean, we blew that. We blew that in Gary.
Well, this is what I want to
was there in Gary.
this is where I want to interject, and I'm going to push another provocation and stay on this line, is that, and I'm going to put it out there, I don't believe there is a we, because I don't want to be we with Jesse Jackson. I don't want to be we with Clarence Thomas. I don't want to be we with Al Sharpton. I don't want to be we with the black. I don't want to be we with the black political class. I don't want to be we with the black cops. I don't want to be we with the black military industrial complex leaders. I don't want to be we with the black talented tens. I don't want to be we with the black corporate executives. And I believe that as long as we keep talking about we, they're going to say, well, it's us, and they're going to be the ones who take this politics of containment. And part of the reason why the problem I have with this black formation is that once you contain yourself in one black bag, they will dispose of you in one black bag. And they will say, we will choose who the we of we are negotiating with. And that's why I say that you rendering this to any form of blackness, this facilitates the ruling class doing what they've always done. When we say we, they choose some fatback and biscuits preacher or NGO worker to be the spokesman to flush the rest of black people down the toilet.
Well, what do you think of the brother I asked this question to everybody here. I can't think of his name right now. I'm drawing a blank. In North Carolina, Poor People's Campaign.
You talking about the preacher?
Reverend, who was his name, Pascal?
Oh, I know what you mean.
What do you guys think of
Reverend
Reverend Barber as a whole? I know he took some
could
sorrows.
I jump on that for a second? I'll let you
go ahead,
say something, Marcus. You could.
No, Drew, I'd like to get Drew to respond.
I agree. I agree with you to a significant extent. I don't want to be we with none of them bootlickers and boule Negroes that you just mentioned. Absolutely, but that's the whole point, Pascal. They are not we, and we are not them. This is what I meant. But there's this reactionary period that we are talking about has created this comprador class. It's created what I call the anti-poverty pimps. I mean, most of these leaders we have today were in the anti-poverty movement, and they came out of local struggles in cities and in municipalities. And and once they became quote politicians, then they were not in the system to undo anything. They were in the system to perpetuate everything. It's one thing to become get into a political office, let's say a mayor of a major city, and then as mayor you just use your authority to take down institutions that nobody could stop you from taking down by law. You could rearrange the whole police department and nobody could stop you. And for 4 years you get to do that. And then by the time you leave office, because you don't really care whether you get reelected or not, by the leave office, it'd be like Humpty Dumpty. It would take all the king's men to put it back together again. And they wouldn't be able to put it back together again because the polarity had changed and because the demographics has changed. But politicians, black politicians, they go into politics for a career, to mac or crack, to get paid, to have their name in lights and a whole bunch of sundry things, and so they fall victim to the coalition that you're talking about. So no, I wouldn't want to be included in we neither. And this is what I was saying about sovereign thinking. We cannot even discuss something as simple as reparations because we're not a people. And we're people precisely because of what Pascal just said.
I want to hear you say it again for those in the back who didn't hear it the first time.
This is what I said. To a certain degree, to a significant degree, Pascal is right, because we are not a people, because we have revisited all of the avenues of institutional reform of the status quo, all avenues of within the paradigms of white supremacist power and social construct. Everything we've done, or some of us, most of us, has been towards that end. And then there's a select group, or you could call it a minority or a fringe or some radicals or whatever, that have not bought into that have in fact attached themselves to our historical radical tradition. And they look back to Kwame Ture, that we look back to Stokely Carmichael, even Marcus Garvey, all the way back to the Haitian Revolution. We have a different historical view than those boule.
Listen, Listen, this is where I agree with you. There is something distinct about the black worker or the black proletariat. And I don't think we have to actually disavow our materialist Marxist analysis to prove that. The black worker is disproportionately rendered to surplus redundant labor in the reserve army of labor. That's a fact. Even the most, quote unquote, as they would say, class reductionist, demsoc socialists can't deny that. And once we realize that the black worker is disproportionately rendered to the reserve army of labor, all of the social ills, mass incarceration, drugs, family dislocation, all of the social dislocation that comes from that fact, which is a fundamental utility of capitalism, means that the black proletariat and its lumpen proletariat will disproportionately suffer the harms and vicissitudes of capitalism.
But look at it this way also. If we would absolutely, this only verifies what I'm saying, that we have a different historical mission than the white working class, because the white working class, the white industrial working class, the European industrial class is no longer revolutionary. It hasn't been revolutionary since the first industrial war. There's no revolutionary potential in the white working class in the white supremacist state. The only revolutionary potential is in the black working class, but black working class has to be a separate entity. It has to be a separate entity precisely because we did not come up in the industrial working, in the industrial capitalist era the same way. It's like Cabral talks, he has a passage where he talks about national liberation. And he says national liberation means the return of the oppressed people to their own historical continuum. And that return is being thwarted by the imperialists, by the capitalists. And I'm saying this in the context
and the comprador amongst that class.
Absolutely. We know that. But what I'm saying is this shows you that we are in this historical epoch right now. This moment, we are on the industrial revolution is over. The effects and the ramifications of it are obvious in terms of planet deterioration, in terms of global oppression, poverty, hunger, disease. We all know the consequences of global finance, capitalism, and imperialism. That is what it is. But at the same time, you know, the empire, the capitalist finance capital internationally is in an unredeemable crisis. And that crisis is brought about by its excesses over the past 200 years. So when we talk about global warming, when we talk about moving to renewable energy, we're talking about changing the basis of a lot of the wealth that was accumulated on fossil energy and institutions that were built on fossil energy and power paradigms that were built on fossil energy. This shit got to change, and the empire has to adjust, and the empire is scrambling to adjust at the same time, while at the same time the people of the world have moved to a different level. We have to remember that white supremacy and the Europeans invented the concept of race, not us. And it was invented precisely to be the benefit of mercantile capitalism. And it was used in that respect historically. But now we see that with globalization, with instant communications and the weaponization of data, you know, that information is intelligence. And we have just as much access to information as the corporations do and as governments do. So it's how we weaponize our data that will determine what our class and what our dialectical materialist approach would look like, how it would manifest itself. I agree with Pascal 100%. Just because we black doesn't mean we abandon scientific or historical analysis of reality, of our reality. I mean, that'd be stupid, you know. So absolutely, you're right in that respect. But at the same time, you know, the people of the world right now, the shift in power that's going on globally requires the empire, U.S. hegemony, European geopolitics to change its it's transforming their ability to contain and continue to exploit those forces and those peoples that it had done since World War II. We got to we in a semi-Bandung movement. I started thinking about this because when Pascal was talking about to be black is not sufficient, and we remember now the Bang Dong conference came about with the hijacking of decolonization and the armed struggle movements in the third world at that time. It was hijacked by both the Soviet Union and the capitalist West. It just so happens that the Soviet Union, in competition with the capitalist West, threw a lot of its behind liberation movements. But we know that even historically, Marx and most of the Marxists, even the progressive labor people, did not see the liberation of third world people as essentially having anything to do with the working class, anything to do with the industrial working class.
Not until Mao came around.
So
some of them got hip to what Mao was talking about, and then they started to say, okay.
But that's the whole thing. After the Second International, and Mao proved. But what did Mao? How did he find that out? He found that out by trying to imitate what happened in the Bolshevik Revolution in China, and he was slaughtered, and they had to flee from the cities and the urban areas and take up bases in the rural areas, and therefore they had to organize the farmers. They had to organize people who were alienated from the land, and the landlord then became the obvious enemy, and so they were able to do that. So they were able to mobilize the rural areas in order to take the cities and the urban areas, whereas the Bolshevik Revolution did the opposite. You see, and then there was the racial issue.
Let me. I'm going to give you another provocation. I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying this dialectic. This is good. I'm going to give you another provocation. What is the analysis of the paradigm when the fulcrum of black electoral politics is to the right in the Democratic Party of white progressives? That would mean that there are more. There are more of them with progressive-leaning politics than those who participate in the black electoral process.
This begs the issue of a united front against fascism, and it begs the issue of an independent political party. And our independent political party, if it's led by black revolutionary leadership, by black abolitionist leadership, is qualitatively different in any left or right wing of the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party and the Republican Party are the same entity. They are of the same. They both exist to administer the empire from both sides of the aisle, so to speak. Look at Biden's policies. What is Biden's foreign policy? How is they different from Trump in vis-a-vis the European settler state of Israel? How are they different from Trump with AFRICOM and the lily pad strategy? How is they different from even Nixon and that other guy, the burning bush? How are they different? They haven't. And they're still talking that hard line about how they lost China, like they own China, and they still trying to get it. You see what they've done with Hong Kong? I mean, they're acting as if Hong Kong was always a separate entity. It was never a part of China, and that it was a consequence of European imperialism and gunboat diplomacy. So if the Chinese decided to undo that and say, well, this is Chinese territory, then you have a whole generation of Kuomintang offspring who had fled to Taiwan and to Hong Kong, you see, and who say that this is their nation, this is who they are. They are not, they may be linguistically and racially and culturally Chinese, but they're politically independent. They're a nation, and blah 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 blah. Okay, and the U.S. backs that, and because it's to their geopolitical interests. So I'm saying that we know that our our role in the African diaspora is so crucial to the liberation of not just people of black people in the diaspora, but the global paradigm of dispossessed and working class people, subsistence farmers. Our if we did have a revolutionary potential like we should have, it would radically transform everything, everything, but we don't. And so therefore we're struggling to try to keep our heads above water. We're dealing with repression. We have political prisoners in prison that haven't been freed. We have institutionalized. I mean, most of the black elected officials and comprador class supported the war on drugs. You see, they
Correct.
supported that. They supported the police kicking in doors in the hood, talking about they were going after crack houses and all of this stuff. They supported the three strikes, you outlaws. These are the same Negroes that are talking today about prison reform and transforming law enforcement. The same people, and so
can we admit
we could
those things? I'm
say
sorry,
again.
sorry to interrupt, but can we admit that those things didn't necessarily happen in a vacuum? I mean, I grew up in the 80s in Richmond, California, and I definitely remember a lot of the nighttime drive-bys, and I definitely remember all the crack house raids, and I definitely remember what the city was like beforehand, and I definitely know what the city's like now. It hasn't gotten much better from a certain standpoint, but I mean, when we talk about tough on crime, to your point, I'm agreeing with you that a lot of the people that were saying let's get tough on crime and let's have these longer sentences were, some of them were even leftists. I mean, right? Pascal, would you agree?
Well,
Some of
but
them
we
were.
have to ask
Some of them.
ourselves. But we have to ask ourselves who benefited from this? Quid pro quo. Who benefited from this paradigm at that point? And look how the war on drugs developed. And Nixon said it clearly when Nixon is the one that pulled our coats to the fact that the U.S. government didn't have a national police force. And he said one of the ways he was going to create the consensus for one or create an effective national police force was to, one, go after the hippies and the drug culture and cloak the crime, take the streets back and the crime against and the crime bills against black people in the ghettos who were burning the places down, who were rebelling, who were demanding entry into institutions and demanding rights. And he did it. And in each point, the war on drugs first started out against marijuana. Then it went against heroin, and then it was cocaine, and then became crack. And in each stage, it became more and more. The U.S. more increasingly militarized the police in order to fight this war, increasingly identified with reactionary Latin American juntas and oligarchies and incorporated death squads into the U.S. to run amok, and this is the period of time, and we have to understand that we just didn't just start doing drive-bys and stuff, after we saw Boys in the Hood. This the creation of tribalism amongst inner city blacks is an exact example of what I mean when people do not have a control of their local politics, do not have control of those institutions that affect their daily lives, especially law enforcement and public safety, especially education, especially housing, especially those vital things that we need as a people to have a decent quality of life. And so what have we have now? When the Crips first came out, there was no generational Crips. There were no Crips before them. And look at their Constitution and what they wrote about. They came out after the demise and the destruction of organizations like the Black Panther Party in the city. These are the lumpen proletariat who could have been organized into a potent defense force, into a potent paramilitary force, into a potent street force to protect their communities. Instead, the police went after them, killed off those leaders that had a little politics, instituted drugs into their ranks and weapons into their ranks, and then so now you have Crips, 4 generations of Crips and Bloods. You know, Grandpop was a Crip, Dad was a Crip, Uncle Joe was a Crip. You know, and I'm Little Joe, Grandpops was Big Joe, and I'm Tiny Joe. You see what I'm saying? We all Crips, understand? And this tribalism, this is what it is. This tribalism. Do we see that same type of tribalism in the Gaza amongst their youth? I mean, you can't get more destitute and bereft of any future than the Palestinian youth. Do you see that tribalism amongst youth in areas where people are resisting outside intervention and control? No. But you see, this tribalism was fostered amongst us. You know, this is why the police in the neighborhood always tell you that they're the baddest gang in the neighborhood. They don't say that they are virtue. You know, they're there to protect and serve. They'd say to all of the hood rats and everybody in the hood, you think you got firepower? Well, I got more firepower than you. So we the bad ones here, and you gonna do what we want you to do. And the opposite of that is to bring in mayors and city managers who then talk about being tough on crime. When was the last time you heard anybody run for mayor in any city that didn't have to say they were tough on crime and they were going to take back the streets and make the streets safe again? And what do we have? We have black mayors and black police chiefs, and these black mayors and these black police chiefs preside over the murder and the brutality of black people in their jurisdiction. So again, it buys into what Pascal is saying. To be black is not sufficient. You know, to have more black elected officials in high places that buy into the system, that are part of the system, is what Pascal is saying. We're not with these people. You see what I'm saying? Because they're not about us. We're not.
Well, my position is
so
this.
I'm just saying.
What happens when the idea or the utility of blackness becomes more valuable to the ruling class than it becomes to actual black people?
Well, I'll even add on top of it this. If we look at D.C. as kind of an example, especially when we talk about the war on drugs and tough on crime laws, you had a white city council member that wanted to decriminalize marijuana, and the pushback actually came from the black nationalist sector that was like, no, this is a gateway drug into heroin addiction, which actually was kind of tearing up the community at the time. And that law gets shot
But
down.
that's not true, though. Well, but I just want to say something. We cannot accept the parameters of the issue and the debate that are set by the enemy and that are set by the ruling elite. Who said that marijuana was a gateway drug? The motherfuckers that wanted to introduce methadone, the same people that have state dope fiends, the same people that erected a whole drug edifice to deal with addiction as if it was some type of socio-pathological threat. Whereas alcohol is good. Alcohol kills more people than marijuana every year. In drunk driving, in incidents, murders, gun violence. Alcohol is legal, isn't it? But there was a time historically when alcohol was banned, and what was alcohol banned? The so-called suffrage movement was banning alcohol on some moral and some religious values. You understand that it was, the elixir of the devil, and it made people crazy, and they banned it. And what happened? Tribalism. What happened? Organized crime emerged and arose out of that period in 1920, in the early industrial period that outlawed alcohol. And alcohol became much like heroin in terms of how profitable it was for these crime organizations. And it corrupted the police. Exactly. Al Capone didn't go to jail for drive-bys and shooting people. He went to jail for tax evasion. Yeah. You see, and now once corporations became people, once corporations became individuals, when is the last time have you seen a pharmaceutical company that's peddled drugs that have addicted people, millions, into addictive drugs, claiming to deal with high blood pressure or nerves or whatever? When was the last time Pfizer got indicted by anybody?
I mean,
when was the last time
they're paying these massive? There's a fine that Purdue is paying that's in the billions, but at the end of the day, I think we all know that these fines are something that they can afford to pay. That's why they agreed to paying him. And I don't know if you saw this recently. I read this yesterday, day before yesterday, that there's a stipulation in this agreement, in this settlement agreement, that they're going to pay this multi-billion-dollar fine, but you can't sue him anymore. Once they pay out this money, it's like, all right, y'all done. We're done playing your reindeer games.
Absolutely. So I just wanted to conclude that when the brother Jason was talking about, how he experienced, that there was these drive-by. I mean, we know we got these crazy kids out there shooting crazy and killing babies and innocent people and drive. But I strongly believe that if our community was organized, and if Black men and women took responsibility for public safety, or even in a collective way, this wouldn't happen. And I've had that experience in the Black Panther Party, where we have told drug dealers, man, you're not slinging this yayo on this block. It's not happening. So if y'all going to continue to do this, we're going to throw your ass off the roof, or we're going to throw your ass over a lamppost, and if you want to get it like that, we could roll like that. And they respected that. They didn't do it. If we had community control of police, and the police lived in our community, how many policemen you think gonna let their daughter walk down the street and a bunch of crackheads are dealing crack on both sides of the street? She got to walk through that. That ain't happening. And so we have to become our own first responders. And when we failed to do that, it was in that vacuum that this tribalism of gang warfare and turf warfare occurred. I mean, you could look at any documentary, you could see that you have gangs and Crips and Bloods and all of these deacons and all of these folks, claiming territory that they don't have no control over. They don't clean the streets. They can't enforce no traffic rules. The only person that has eminent domain is the government. They're talking about this is their territory. What kind of shit is that? It's your territory, and when Popo want to roll in, they roll in whenever they feel like it, and throw your ass up against the wall and beat your mama into the concrete. And what you gonna say? You gonna throw your gun away then, huh? You ain't gonna fight because you don't have no organized armed agents in your community. You do not have the ability to defend the Black community and its integrity. And without that power, without that ability, then everything else that we're talking about right now just basically becomes rhetoric and intellectual.
I'm going back to my original point. Who is the Black community? Who's the Black community, Dhoruba? Who's the Black community?
The Black community is the Black communities are those neighborhoods, or those hoods that used to have the word neighbor in front of it. When I grew up, our community wasn't called the hood, it was neighborhood. And that meant that we were neighbors to each other. I mean, when I grew up in the South Bronx, I couldn't, if I left my block and was doing some dumb shit 2 blocks away, my mama would know about it before I got home. Okay, there was this homogeneity, and we weren't rich. This was working class, poor communities living in tenements.
I believe that you can have I believe that you can have a working class community of Black people. And I totally agree with that. And I think you can have multiple Black communities of working class. But my basic point is that the unitary facilitation of racial collectiveness is a con game in the 50-year counter-revolution that has done nothing but enrich the class of Negroes who work as contractors for the ruling class, while the economic precarity.
But that is the normal. That is the point of encapsulation. That doesn't mean that what's being encapsulated is invalid.
It's invalid if you're going to be working with those Negroes and calling them part of your we.
No, but it's invalid if those who are encapsulated become the primary agents of I don't want to even use the word change. The primary agents of expanding the power of the ownership class, of the elite, of the political class. And I think that's your real beef. Your real beef is that we don't have Black leaders. We don't have leaders who exercise power as if they were black. They exercise power as if they are Americans and black doesn't matter. You see, and that's like the flip side of your argument, which says we are proceeding as black people, when in fact that's to the utility of the enemy, and if when we're actually workers, you know, and I disagree with the notion that the majority of black people fit neatly into the post-industrial age working class, because we've all been reduced to consumers on a level where, you know, where we cannot produce more than we can. We produce. I'm sorry. We produce more than we could possibly consume. So consumption and working class becomes imperative to capitalism, to finance capitalism, and this is globally as well as nationally. So now we have a situation with global elite, where the elite in other nations, and you know this from our history and from recent history, Pascal, the elite in France, or the political elite, or the financial elite in different nations, they had their own interests at heart. They primarily were down to enrich French, the French elite, the French finance house. But now we have globalized what I call New Age imperialism, which is globalization, which was piggybacked off of old age imperialism. You know, that now we have a global elites, global collaboration with ruling classes and political elites. That's what these conferences are in the mountains all the time. That's what these conferences are all about. When they call together the so-called global elite, and all the billionaires show up, and then they call into the waiting room the niggas from Africa, you know, that they want to keep on the payroll, and have them sit in the room and come out for a photo op and say they're going to send $100 million to fight Ebola, or we're going to do this, or we're going to do that, and they'll trot out these bootlickers like what's the name, Yedema used to be, and this other piece of crap in Egypt. All of these guys, you see. So we have to understand that, of course, the enemy has flipped race on its head and used it against us. That's why black places and high places don't mean nothing. You know, that's why I think Pascal is talking about, and I agree with him. We ain't us. You know, they ain't we me. You know, but at the same time, that doesn't mean we couldn't have been, or we shouldn't have been, or we. You see, it's lack of sovereign thinking. If we were sovereign people, then I mean, it would be like the Kurds, for instance. I mean, if we know anything about the history of the Kurds, it would be like the Kurds participating in a regime after the overthrow of Saddam Hussein. Does that mean they're not a people? Does that mean that the autonomy that they're seeking isn't a subterfuge or a substitute for self-determination? And especially seeing that they're sitting on the richest oil reserves in Iraq, you know, so that gives them a high degree of economic independence. So I think the national liberation in the age of globalization has shown that nationalism as an ideology has come to a historical end.
Woo!
That we are trying to figure out we are trying to figure out, how does a global community function in the age of instant communication and technology. And we're getting further and further along in artificial intelligence. We're getting further and further along with instant communications and bio and biooptics and all of these things. And so, you know, I was just telling some brothers here, General Motors and some American car manufacturers had made statements that they're not going to produce another internal combustion engine car by 1935. Okay, so where all these combustion engine cars are going to go? They're going to throw them away? They're going to chop them up and make windmills out of them? Hell no. They come in here. Africa. That's where they're going. While the developed world rides around on electric cars, some cars with no wheels, on air cushions, and all of this shit. You see what I'm saying? They're going to come here. They're going to come to the place that has the most potential for renewable energy. Africa. Africa has the
Okay, well,
most potential of any continent for renewable energy.
all right, Dhoruba,
You see,
let's hear me,
and
hear me out. Hear me out here. I think we've definitely agreed that the particular utility of the black proletariat and the lumpen proletariat to capitalism, we know that it renders them disproportionately to the reserve army of labor. So I will agree that there is a need for a black working class proletariat and lumpen proletariat politics, because there is a material political reality that the black lumpen and the black proletariat faces in capitalism that has been consistent. And it is that capitalism disproportionately renders them to the reserve army of labor. But at the same time, what happens in the capitalist political sphere is that framing their political needs in the context of blackness allows them to be contained in a bag with elites that do not have their class interests, that work as compradors against their interests. So the question becomes,
but I don't think.
hold on, this question. The question becomes,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
can the black working class create a black working class politics that allows it to align with those of multi-ethnic coalitions who are similarly class situated, but maintain the integrity of its working class exegesis as those that are disproportionately rendered to the reserve army of labor? That's the question I want to ask you.
I think absolutely. I think they can. I think that's absolutely.
So we on the same page.
That's absolutely was at the. We always been. This is what I was trying to say to you. That it's natural for the white supremacist state to encapsulate the concept of black sovereign thinking and turn it against itself. You see, but that doesn't mean because they turned it against themselves that we're not a people. But we are a people. But we are a unique people, and that uniqueness does not absolve us of our working class or does not remove us from the industrial working class that came up in this country. We've known, like you said, we've always been on the low end of all of these working class movements. And so why don't we have a third political party that encompasses the entire disenfranchised working class, of whether they're of color, white, or whatever? Why don't we? And it's been sabotaged at every turn. It's been sabotaged at every turn.
And again, I
like
think that the goal is to, if you're going to make that kind of coalition, you do it by strengthening your own black working class sovereignty against your own comprador and against the white working class who may not have.
Which brings us to where? Absolutely, which brings us to the point that all politics is local, that we have to take political power in those areas where we have mass concentration, in those areas where we can control. Look at the infrastructure bill that Biden's putting out, almost $2 trillion infrastructure bill that he brought down for $5 trillion. The infrastructure bill doesn't really deal with building black communities and inner cities and their infrastructures. It deals with bigger infrastructural issues like roads and bridges, connecting states and all of this stuff, and rehabilitating, transferring farmland and rehabilitating water facilities. But it's not talking about urban renewal on any large scale where there's black masses of working people. And what is there? And how do working people in the urban areas get to work? What kind of work do they have access to? You know, Pasquale, there was a time at the height of the Industrial Revolution that subways and mass transportation were designed to bring the workers from one point to another so that they could perform their jobs and take them back to where they live. Okay, and now that's gone. Okay, mass transportation has been changed, has been racialized, has been redlined, and all of these things. So the average black worker has to travel most often a significant distance from where they really live just to work. And then the type of work they have, they can't buy nothing. Wages go up, but they're a consumer. These workers today are essentially consumers. They are not really building anything. They're consuming everything. The people that are benefiting from their consumption. This is, I mean, look at the reason why we found out that hospitals had couldn't deal with this pandemic, because in America, an empty hospital bed was unprofitable. Insurance companies needed empty beds. I mean, the medical is not designed to prevent or eliminate ill health and disease. They're designed to administer it and maintain it. And in maintaining those diseases is where they get their money and their profit from patents and all of this stuff. So yes, Pasquale, I think that we could chew bubble gum and piss at the same time. I think we really can. I think that you're absolutely right. We need to have a black. I mean, what was Atrium? Look at the black workers in Detroit during the waning, during the waning years of the automotive industry. I mean, these brothers, and I knew some of the organizers there, these brothers were straight up working class fighters, man. And, but we have to look, I mean, they weren't anti-black power. They were at every Black Power convention. You see what I'm saying? The same way with Jesse Gray and the tenants strike and the tenants work associations in New York. They led the way in organizing tenants, and that's why we have rent control today. It's because of those mass organizations. So black people have always identified, with working class issues. But the problem has been that this has been working class issues in a white supremacist construct, and the white working class is just as racist as the ruling class. And it's only this generation, literally this post-60 generation, that has abandoned much of the white supremacist trope and stereotypes and look at the world in a different way. And the last time white folks had a generation like that, it was in the 60s, and they tuned in and dropped out. And you see what happened. You see what they did to them. And many of them now are their offsprings are the ones that's in government. And we have to understand that those individuals, the Mitch McConnells and all of these crackers, they grew up during this period when campuses were aflame with SDS organization and the anti-draft movement and the Black Power movement. And these were the guys that was on campus wearing their little conservative outfits, talking about they were going all in for Humphrey and all of this shit. These are the same ones. Go look at the history of these knuckleheads that are in Congress right now. So we have to understand that in each period that we have dropped the ball as a people, we also dropped the ball as working class people, because our situation in America is what they call the original sin of America. That's what makes us special. And that means special in a negative way. That doesn't make us special in a superior way. It makes us special in a negative. And without this working class analysis, without a working class party that embraces the same vicissitudes of all workers, all poor workers who are now consumers in global capitalism, without that type of movement, without that rainbow coalition, that's what the idea was about. You see, without that being manifest, we're going to always have this liberal bullshit wing of the Democratic Party, which basically is the center of the Republican Party, and the right wing of the Republican Party, which is basically, these crackers. I mean, the only thing they differ in is how to name us nigger. How to pass a bill that'll treat us and put us in where we belong. And so, and if we don't see that one, we do have to identify ourselves as workers, not just as workers in the post-industrial age, but as the global community of disenfranchised and impoverished people, because none of the nation states today in Africa has a working class leadership. None of the states in Africa that were artificially created by the imperialists have working class movements that are controlling and running the country. In fact, the comprador class, the same ones that we have that run the countries, that are down with the U.S. and its foreign policy. And this goes for black folks in Africa. This goes for the people in the Middle East. This for workers in Southeast Asia. This goes for around the world. So when we look at the streets, and I mean, I've been to places in the last year from Beirut to Oman to Turkey, to South Africa, to East Africa, everywhere, the age of the people in the streets is damn near the same. And they have the same beef, and it's with the state. And it's with how they have no future. It's how they have no control over their own destiny. People are in the streets everywhere for that purpose. So this corresponds to the global elite. The global elite is meeting in Davos, every 2 years or something? They have their conferences where they sit down and they call the shots. Where is solidarity between working people now? There's no third international. There's nothing exists. The U.S. is able to impose embargoes on any country that it wants. Look at Venezuela, how they've embargoed and blockade Venezuela. Cuba, the same thing. Zimbabwe, the same thing. When we look at how the finance capital has balkanized Africa, creating these bogus area trade unions, ECOWAS, SADC, to prevent Pan-African unity. When was the last time you heard the word Pan-African come out of the African Union? You ain't heard that shit since Kwame, since it was the Organization of African American Unity. Okay, Pan-African really means the Organization of International Workers, and this is because the majority of people on the planet that are workers are people of color. Europe is a peninsula. Look at Europe; it's a small peninsula with a small population. Okay, and it's melanin deficient. There's something to be said about the paranoia and inhumanity of people who are melanin deficient towards people who have melanin content. History has shown us this. What was the papal decree that said to the Spaniards and Queen Isabella and Ferdinand, that anybody that they see that don't have a white skin and not a Christian, they could do anything they wanted to do? Huh? You think that shit changed? That shit ain't changed. Ain't nothing changed but the address. You see, so we need to understand, yes, we have to identify ourselves as an African diaspora, because that would make us the most powerful diaspora on the continent. But without a Pan-African approach to the geopolitical paradigm of globalization, we're nothing but, a bunch of academics and intellectuals and elites talking bullshit. You see,
I have no problem. I totally agree with you. I have
look at just what happened. Haiti. Look at what just happened.
I've been talking about that for 3 days.
You could scour the news. We could scour the news. And you know how hard it is to find a news report on what just happened in Haiti? Al Jazeera, the only ones that showed what a little bit about it was the Chinese, was the CGTV. Where they showed the Colombian president talking about he was going to cooperate fully with the Haitian people to come to the bottom of why these Colombian so-called retired soldiers were involved in the assassination of the Haitian regime. Head of the Haitian regime. So I mean, I got to look for the news on Haiti. But could you imagine if that was some Mickey Mouse knucklehead leader in the Balkans somewhere, in some state that we never even heard of and got assassinated? Man, that's all the breaking news you heard. You see? So we need to understand that there is a power in the idea and the concept of Pan-African a unity and a Pan-African movement. And if we did have a Pan-African political paradigm in Africa, that would radically change a lot. There is no reason why the African Union does not have a Pan-African refugee and relief program, a project, agency.
Well,
no reason.
I think that part of the problem is that the concept of Pan-Africanism has become a tool of petite bourgeois university-trained intellectuals and not a proletarianized movement of working class and lumpen Black people globally in the Black diaspora. It's a fetish concept.
You
for
hard, Pascal. But Pascal, you hard, bro. Why you so cold?
I think it's true.
You cold, brother. Why you so cold?
Would you want to answer that super?
This just a segment. You understand? Don't be so cold, brother. You just, oh man, come on, baby. I can't answer that.
I've got a question because where this whole thing started, is like Pascal asking the question of the limitations, or or what is the stance or the situation with the Black movement within the United States. And I guess like what I would want to know, especially speaking, having the chance to speak with you, Dhoruba, is what do you see the differences are between some of the actions of Black Panther Party, of the BLA, of some of these movements? What are the differences? And I think you've already alluded to some of these things, as when you're talking about like community policing. Some of these things are just literally finding the problems that are happening within the community and having a direct response to it, not just an electoral ask or some type of nonprofit, this is our goal, lofty goal. They're just kind of coming direct in the community and saying, this is what we're going to do right now. I guess, yeah, are there any steps that we're missing now? Because this is what I got to grow up in. A lot of y'all are talking about my generation.
I think, but you see, that's, I just had a recent experience and with one of the younger brothers that's in the split in the Black Alliance for Peace, and these kids got some, they got some pretty on point politics. They're trying to get their act together, and so they asked me. They were going over a piece that I wrote about 30 years ago called "Towards Rethinking Self-Defense in a Racist Culture," something like that. The original title was "Towards Rethinking Revolutionary Violence in a White Supremacist Context." That was the original, but I toned it down to the and so they went over the article, and then when I heard their responses, oh my God, it was so disjointed. So I said, did they really read the article? They didn't understand the nexus between decentralization of police and how you exercise local political power, how you use law enforcement and prosecutorial agencies, what their purpose is. It was devoid of any type of consistent analysis. It was all about how they grew up, what they experienced, like when they were small kids. And these are kids, 24, 25. You see what I'm saying?
It's a basic lack of understanding of civics.
Yeah, but that goes to what your question was about the revolutionary potential right now for Black people in America. We it's not just civics. What has happened was that a major strategy that's taught in counterinsurgency is that you have to incapacitate the ability of any revolutionary or mass movement to pass on any type of leadership or experiences to another generation of activists. I mean, that's fundamental. You can't allow leaders to pass on their experiences and their organizational skills to another generation, because that'll keep the movement going. This is why the Vietnamese won their struggle, because they didn't get the memo they were supposed to lose, because they didn't get the memo. You fight the most powerful military force on earth, you can't win. We didn't get that memo. So that's why they went out hanging on helicopter skids, you see. So because they were able to fight from one generation to the next, and they understood that no matter what goes down, we're going to stay here, we're going to be here, and we're going to win, you see. And that was the major point of COINTELPRO. That was the major point of destroying Garvey, the Garvey movement. That was the major point of misdirecting the Black Power movement into cultural nationalism and into the type of despicable displays of politics that Pascal is talking about in the name of blackness. You see, and nothing's changed. It's still, we still have those brothers who are claiming, that they've been struggling for years and years around reparations, and now the reparations has a bill in Congress. People don't want to talk to them, and now so they want to be, the major spokespersons in their head for reparations, talking about reparations. And I told this little forum that's coming up. I don't know if you knew about it. This forum's supposed to be coming up this month, I think on the 15th or something like that, on reparations. It's supposed to be this big Zoom conference. And I told one of the professors, I said, man, y'all are, reparations, the way you presenting it is an oxymoron. It's a political oxymoron because we're not a people. Y'all are not presenting ourselves as a people. We have half of our population trying to get reforms and acting and talking like we are Americans and we deserve this in America just like everybody else. And y'all are talking about, we ADOS, we were the victims of chattel slavery and the expansion of mercantile capitalism and made America. So they owe us. Who's us? Who's us? We revisiting the Voting Rights Act every goddamn 4 or 5 years. Who's
Because
us?
listen, Dhoruba, I'll give you my opinion. The contradictions of capitalism in the neoliberal era in the 50-year counter-revolution has been so brutal that the comprador elite that has been the ventriloquist for the black masses, because they are so worried about maintaining their security as utilitarian tools of the ruling class, and they cannot identify with a criticism of the capitalist hierarchy, because they realize if they did that, they would have to form a working class politics that's not their own, is doubling down on the racial ventriloquist fatback and biscuits politics. And that's why we have this great awakening, because they believe that they can get concessions that will benefit them more than working class, poor, and black people. And that's the only thing they can get out of this, because they're too cowardly and cynical to develop a working class politics for black people, because they know they will cut them out from being racial ventriloquists and the utility would disappear.
Well, I don't have no disagreement with what you just said, Pascal, but I think that you're giving them too much credit in the sense that, that they don't want to be identified as ordinary working class black people, not just because they have a utilitarian purpose and they could have a slick house and they could have some nice cars and they could live that bullshit middle class existence and without worrying about going to jail. Of course, they could still worry about getting pulled over for a broken taillight and getting murdered, but that's an exception, not the rule. I guess that's how they look at it. But you're right. I think you're absolutely right. So if that's the case, in which I happen to agree it is, then we have to really understand that these are black enemies of black people.
We need the class contradictions. The class contradictions of black people needs to be sharpened, and we need less black unity and more black class warfare, in my humble opinion.
Now, I guess something I want to ask.
I'd like to hear Dhoruba address that.
Go ahead.
Well, my question ties to, I think, to what you're dealing at, Pascal, and is say, well, recognizing that the Black Panthers, we're doing what Dhoruba, you're saying, like we need now on more on a larger scale, a separate third party that ties into the needs of the people directly, but also works in the institutions of power to start dismantling some of the oppressive nature of it. Now, part of that, you had a education process to come into the party. Now, I think Pascal would agree to this, and I ask you, was like, should part of that education be the failures of only coalescing around the black community, without actually describing, hey, maybe this is where the other, like the movements were let, were being able to be dismantled because they didn't transfer over to a working class narrative.
But I like to ask both of you a question. Given that we see that we are really in a neo-fascist movement here, and that a significant segment of the white population, and it's been basically documented. I think it's something like 87 million, or more than 100 million people of the white folks believe in this this so-called myth that they are being persecuted and they're being denied the benefits of America. They want to make America great again and all this bullshit. This phenomenon is just not just here in the United States. It's in Germany, it's in France,
UK,
it's in most of the EU countries, and yeah, definitely in the UK, Canada, Australia, everywhere. This rise of the so-called quote right is significant.
You said the same
And
thing
last
about
time, of course, we saw this was in 1930, was in the 1930s, you know. But of course, things are materially different than they were then. There's a lot of differences that are between them. But I think Pascal is absolutely on point when we could see that. I mean, we could go back and just close our eyes and imagine what E. Franklin Frazier would have said about these Negroes today and where they came from, you know. So absolutely we see that, and look at even how in the educational system, how these crackers have developed this whole argument against so-called cancel culture, how the HBCUs now all of a sudden has coffers offered up to them from corporations and everything. So
Kamala was speaking at Howard University the other day. I'm sorry. Yeah, Kamala was speaking at Howard University just the other day, and like literally all of these, and like these are young black folks. These are these are people younger than me, and they're clapping along, celebrating everything that she says.
Yeah, because you have this black woman magic bullshit going on. You understand, and that's another encapsulation and co-optation that perpetuates that, because we notice that in a lot of these situations, whether it was Baltimore, whether it's Chicago, whether it's some other major cities, the mayor is someone who was supposed to be the first black woman this and the first black woman that, you see. And so we haven't gotten out of this syndrome of the first Negro this and the first Negro that. So Pascal is absolutely right about the black comprador class, and I believe the class struggle has to be intensified. But I believe the class struggle has to be intensified on a way that's black. That we have to really understand that.
I agree with that.
Not afford. We cannot give these people the opportunity to perform for these crackers in our community. And the way we do that is we have to ostracize them. We have to ostracize them physically. We have to ostracize them politically. We have to create our own media. And I think that's the easiest thing to do in this age right now, is to create our own.
And sometimes we might have to get down with the Mau. Sometimes we might have to get down with the Mau.
I mean, one of the first run-ins But listen, one of the first run-ins I had with Charlie Rangel was snatching the microphone out of his hand, out of his mitt on 125th Street and Avenue, you know, and running him off the corner, you know, right down the street from the Black Panther Party office. You know, he was running. Yeah, I mean, bootlickers is bootlickers, man. You know, nobody slapped that bald head Lewis up in the head talking that bullshit. You know, talking about sitting in and protesting. I mean, come on, man. We the ones that give these Sharptons and these bootlickers a utility and license, man. You know, we do need slap squads. We do need, what they call we do need. I mean, come on, man. I mean, you know, let me give you an example about the counterintelligence program, just to give you some practical information. You know, when they did a survey one time, I think it was in 1968, 68, 69. It was an NBC survey. You could look it up. And they asked black folks in the black community what organization, it might have been 70. You got to remember, by 1970, the counterintelligence program, and what we're talking about, the counter-revolutionary forces had already won the day. It just wasn't, we just didn't see it yet fully. They had already knocked off our movements, misdirected them, co-opted them. They had already did this by 1970, 71. You see? So they did a survey, and they asked black people, ordinary working class black people, took a poll, and asked them what were the three organizations, black organizations, they respected the most in the U.S. They said the Southern Leadership, SCLC, the Black Panther Party, and I believe the third organization was the NAACP. The Black Panther Party was between two organizations that were decidedly reformist, decidedly integrationist, decidedly nonviolent. And when they was asked, well, why do you suspect the Black Panther? Why do you respect the Black Panther Party? Because they said that the Black Panther Party stood up and because they stood up for black people, they were being harassed and murdered by the police. This was something very simple for everybody to see. You see, so what Pascal is saying is correct, and we do have to wage class struggle against the comprador class, and we have to do it uncompromisingly. But the problem with that is that we have a generation of younger activists who are not in touch with their own radical history, so they can't distinguish the comprador class from a revolutionary class. All the dude got to do is sound slick. I mean, Ron Karanga comes up, he gets speaking engagements every Kwanzaa, you know, and you got families that grew up with Kwanzaa that revere them. So when we talk about pork chop nationalism, we talk about the role that us played in suppressing genuine black power in the 60s and 70s. They think I'm crazy. They think I'm just hating. Same way with Angela. I mean, we know her history, but people think that she was an icon of the 60s to the point where they put her in the Black Panther Party. So historical revisionism historical revisionism is a quality, is a tool of encapsulating the idea and the concept of black survival in a white supremacist construct. We cannot relinquish the necessity to survive as black people in a financial in a socioeconomic construct that was designed specifically to maintain us in conditions of servitude, and not just based on our working class position and our working class status, but based on how we looked, who we were, and who were our ancestors. And that's a problem. That's a wealth. That's a problem for white folks in this country. That's why they try to frame the parameters of debate around race today and make it look like it's a coming to reckoning now. And so that they can sing Kumbaya, next year or something, or next Martin Luther King Day, and they give you Juneteenth, as a holiday, and then you have these old sisters and young sisters, doing the Soul Train line down in the middle of the street, talking about not jumping brooms and all of this stuff. You see? So yeah, they done turned black into being clowns. That's true. And like I said, I agree with Pascal that black is not sufficient. I agree that in the final analysis that just to be black is not sufficient, but also to believe that we as black workers can achieve any type of revolutionary power, any type of revolutionary change without mobilizing and organizing Black-led, and I say led because Black people, as Pasquale pointed out, are the most exploited, most marginalized, and most demonized working class ethnic group in America as a working class. And I don't think that class can erase race as a major issue of struggle in a white supremacist society, or at least until that white supremacy, the power of that white supremacy is overthrown.
Can I ask one last question before we wrap up? And actually, this is for Dhoruba and Pascal. What do you think? Like, I guess I think there's obvious some like class differences between the Black community then and now. I'm interested in like, yeah, what do you think the differences are in like the overall Black community? How does that make it harder or easier? And I mean, you could deal with also tying in technology and communication. Do you think it's easier or harder then and now in order to start actually organizing and creating a substantial third-party structure?
I think that what has happened, and I'll answer first, I'll let Drew go. Before the rise of Obama, there was basically no movement politics at all. It was a total 50-year counter-revolution, and Black movement politics fell asleep. What has happened after Obama is that the Black comprador class is using racial charade politics to line their pockets because they realize that the economic contradictions of capitalism are so sharp that they're doubling down on a racial narrative that they ignored for 50 years because now they realize that they have nothing else because they have no critique of capitalism or class. So they're doubling down on basically 50-year-old strategies of racial democracy and race-first discourse that's really only going to give them remedies that's going to line their pockets and leave working class people out.
I agree, but I also think that the nature of finance capital and its institutions are under extreme stress right now, which is one of the reasons why the idea of Black the minimum wage. And a living minimum wage has been embraced by the most reactionary wing of the Democratic Party. This is to usurp and undermine any legitimate working class struggle, not just for a minimum wage, but for working class rights to not only a living wage, but to the ownership of property, to the use of public wealth for the benefit of working people. And I think that, there's a passage in the Quran that talks about the Prophet Muhammad and how Allah is the best of planners. And it says that the men plot.
Mankind plans, but Allah is the best of. Mankind plots and plans, but Allah is the best of planners.
Absolutely, and it was out of the clear blue that this pandemic came along, and it revealed a lot about the state vis-a-vis ordinary working people. They saw that the state never had their interests at heart, that the state only had the interests of the insurance companies and the major pharmaceutical companies at heart. And that, in fact, the so-called Obama plan was something that was beneficial to them in terms of healthcare. Of course, they hadn't reached the idea, the notion of universal healthcare and socialist principles of rights of working people to decent housing and health care. They hadn't reached that level, but at the same time, they saw that now that the state basically wasn't about them at all. This is why we've had all these uprisings of younger people who are demanding change. Unfortunately, because the class contradiction hasn't been sharpened the way it should have been, I think that it's easily misdirected, and I think it's co-opted things like minimum wage, livable minimum wage. What is that? You're a consumer in a consumer society, and I mean, what is minimum wage? I mean, what is new age imperialism that is globalized poor workers, and have them producing, phone chips, in Taiwan somewhere, for gadgets, for these gadgets that cost hundreds and hundreds of dollars, and they're getting paid like maybe $1.68 a day or some stupid shit. You see. So what I'm to say is that unless we understand that finance capital today has reached its limitations of providing and organizing, the resources of 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 the economy and the state to benefit people. I think people realize that now. So I think the opportunity for organizing working class people is rife with potential at this particular point. And I think that the same goes for the organization of the diaspora, the black diaspora, in terms of understanding that we have to be our own first responders. We really have to fight against the so-called criminalization of solidarity, uh, when we define solidarity with revolutionary or liberation movements abroad as supporting terrorist organizations, and therefore we're liable to to legal sanction for exercising solidarity. No such laws prohibit the Zionist organizations here from supporting the state of Israel, which is definitely a European settler state that engages daily in terrorism, terrorizing the occupied territories. However, we don't see that APAC is considered the agent of a foreign government. It's not registered as the agent of a foreign. It's registered as a political action committee. So why haven't the BDS movement moved to have them designated agent of unregistered agent of a foreign government? Then it would show exactly where the sources of U.S. Zionist support are here in the U.S. One of the major factors for, in my view, is miseducating uh, um, 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 the black working class is the effect and the impact that Zionism and the evangelical Zionist movement in the U.S. has on government and religious institutions. Who sanctioned the this whole European settler state experiment that was launched after World War II, after World War II and World War One. So I think that we really have to up our game when it comes to understanding and an analysis of our plight. And I think Pascal is right that we do have to have a sharper class analysis, that we have to understand that class, is a font significance, but it's not the only significant. Has to be organized, because we're not just dealing with an oppressive, a homogeneous state, where the bourgeoisie is of the same racial composition, and they're the same composition as the owners of production. We're dealing with the complete opposite, the absolute complete opposite. We're divided as workers, from white workers, from immigrant and migrant workers. I mean, we know that, for instance, working class people have been brought here from Vietnam that collaborated with the U.S. In the war in Vietnam, and they came over here into Hawaii, and they got subsidies to start their businesses, and then you can drive through parts of LA, and it's just like driving through Little Saigon. In fact, I think they got a section in LA they call Little Saigon, and and it's the same thing with Iraqis and Afghans who are coming over now. So it becomes very for us to identify with these particular reactionary populations who collaborate with the U.S. imperialists in their own homeland, and now they found refuge here. Will they be a part of this party, of this political party, or will they form their own right-wing parties to counter that? And we see that with Trump. We see that there was a significant uptake in black voters for Trump. And what class did they come from? Who were they? You see, and so, you know, if that's possible, then when we talk about working class solidarity, it almost solely has to be with people who are oppressed, who are exploited, and who are people of color just like us. And so I don't think that we are going to get too many asylum seekers that came here from Thailand and from Vietnam to be in our working class party. I think they'd be like just like the Gusanos in Cuba. You know, of course they're older generation and they dying out. But we know the role that they've played. They have been a stalwart of right-wing white supremacy in America. You see?
Yep.
And
listen, we're gonna wrap this up, Dhoruba, man. You're fading out. It's getting dark where you are.
Yes, it was. It is dark. That's because these cheap ass people in this 5-star hotel will put on the lights. I don't know what. I guess we get. In fact, let me start raising hell. Hey, George, ask them could they turn on the lights over here, man. Yeah, tell them what's their problem, man. You know, I ain't gonna buy no more pineapple juice.
Well,
listen, man, we've been on for 2 hours. And I got to do another show tonight with Janice Graham, all coming run.
2 hours flew by.
Oh, man. Hey, no wonder they was calling me on the phone. I thought it was just, oh, buddy. 2 hours. Then, Pascal, see, I get wrapped into you, man. You get me into a time warp over here, man. You know? Starting to get like the MAGA people, man. They in an alternative reality. You know? they in an alternative world. So, man, I know we wrapped up. I guess we did wrap up. Did we wrap up already?
We're wrapping up.
We're wrapping up. We're not off yet.
We haven't gone off yet. We'll go off now.
Because I was going to ask. Because I wanted to ask you about. You see, all you got to do is be fair, man. See what I'm saying? They dissed me, man. They turned them up and turned them. Don't play with me, man. Okay, all right. That's right. I run this motherfucker here. That's right. White boys over here at the thing. White boys over at the table looking at me. They over at the stable here looking at me.
Well, let's thank you for spending some time with us today, 2 hours with us today. This is the Saturday free show where we don't cut off to go to the Patreon after hours. If you guys want to see more of this content, please hit the subscribe button.
Dhoruba, man, you down to come back on here again, man?
Man, you know I am. You know, I gotta try to get my act over here, man. Time's running out. You know, man, there's so much happening over here, man. And you know, I gotta get back to my boy. You know, my boy's going to West Virginia next year, so this is
congratulations on that.
His ball out, yeah, man. He's one of the top 10 D-backs in Georgia. You know?
University of West Virginia to play football.
WVU.
He going, yeah.
Oh shit!
No joke. I knew a dude that played there. He was a safety.
That's big time college.
It was almost 20 years ago now. So.
Oh, you went dark, Drew. Did we lose him?
I just fade to black. I said it was going to happen. I put it out in the universe.
That's crazy if he did that. If he was just like, all right then, peace, niggas.
Buy my son's jersey when that shit comes out. He'll actually have the rights to that shit.
No, he that new rule. That's crazy. All All right, let's go ahead and play this video and let's get out of here.
For everyone. You've had twice you referred to the Negroes, the so-called Negroes. You find some fault with this description,
Yes.
I gather.
Mr. Muhammad teaches us that Negro is a term that was applied to us during slavery by the slave master. And right today, it's a term that is used only to point out the descendant of slaves. It's never used for black people, period. Africans can come to this country. They aren't called Negroes. And if they are called Negroes, they resent it. So if Negro meant black, as we've been taught, it would be a term that would be applicable to or pliable to everyone. But he says that it is something that means a slave or something it means something that has been left out of society, politically, economically, educationally, and otherwise.
Former member of the 1960s Black Panther Party, as well as a member of the Black Liberation Army, Dhoruba Bin Wahad has dedicated his life to black revolutionary struggle in the United States and globally. Today we will ask Dhoruba, what is the revolutionary capacity of Black America in 2021? Felt that way.
Eldridge Cleaver, the former communist, has traded in his gun for a Bible, and he is now a born-again Christian and a Republican. His transformation came after early years spent in and out of prison, a failed marriage, a failed attempt at a U.S. Senate seat, and a crack cocaine addiction that nearly ended his life a couple of years back. Today, Cleaver spends much of his time reading the Bible, writing, and occasionally on the lecture circuit. He speaks to college students around the country, stressing the good over the negative image of the movement. And he says that Black America is actually better off for having had the Panthers.